I'm really glad it turned out to be such a beautiful day. Last time we were almost in this room, it was snowing. And so I feel like rewinding the tape and starting again on this beautiful spring day. It's so wonderful to have all of you here, and I thank you so much on behalf of the Department in Curriculum and Teaching for making time in your very busy schedules at this time of year to be here to honor our dear colleague and friend, Celia Genishi. I'm Marjorie Siegel. I'm the chair of the Department of Curriculum and Teaching, following in very big footsteps. And I'm delighted that you could be here to honor Professor Celia Genishi and celebrate her distinguished scholarship in the fields of early childhood education and language and literacy education, and her unwavering commitment to the lives and careers of generations of students in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching, many of whom are here today. It's a wonderful reunion, I think. Celia's generosity of spirit. We're celebrating her long-standing insistence that social justice be the aim of our work as scholars, teachers, and citizens. When the new academic year begins in September, those of us who've been privileged to be her colleagues in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching will find it hard to believe she's doing something other than meeting with students, teaching class, providing feedback on manuscripts for a book upcoming in TC Press series that she has edited for many years in language and literacy. Well, she will be surprised to see that she's not offering sage advice to a department member, such as myself, needing a lot of help, sharing news in the hallway, a favorite activity, or any of the other myriad of everyday activities that together, layer upon layer, have left an indelible mark on all of us for these many years. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, however, I'd also like to thank a few people here at Teachers College who made this event possible. I want to thank Trish McNichols and Brandon Glazer from from the College Events Planning, and I want to thank our wonderful C&T staff members, our Director of Academic Administration, Alicia Arthur, and Felicia Smart-Williams, along with the rest of the team who has prepared such a wonderful event. Now, following the event, we're going to celebrate with a wonderful reception up in 304 Zankel, and you're all invited to take the elevator. I think the elevator and the stairs are both working now in Zankel, so we can go up the stairs and celebrate, and there will be lots of time for chatting and toasting and so on. And I have an assignment for everyone, which is that I have a beautiful blank book here, and I'm going to put it on a lectern out in the 304, and I'm going to invite you to share your thoughts with Celia on the occasion of her retirement. So please remember your assignment. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the panel today. I wanted to have an event that honored Celia's scholarship, and Celia has been a prolific scholar, a significant scholar. Everyone in this room, I think, is familiar with and has been touched by her work, not to mention the many teachers and children who have been impacted by it. So we have a panel, a very special panel. Each member brings very distinctive perspectives and knowledge and understanding, and has been impacted by Celia. And I'm going to start in the order in which they're going to speak. And what I asked everyone to do was to please identify a couple of pieces of scholarship, publications from Celia, anything they chose that they wanted to, that related to their interests, and to offer a response. And what does it mean to you, and what is the significance of the work? And so today we're going to hear from, first of all, Dr. Sharon Ryan, who's Associate Professor at Rutgers University, and was a doctoral student here many years ago in early childhood education. Come on, 1998.
That's when I graduated.
Oh, well, you and I came about the same time. Following her will be Dr. Tammy Spencer. Shall I say a more recent grad? I'm already in big trouble. Associate Professor at Montclair State University. Professor Susan Recchia from the Department of Curriculum and Teaching, and a colleague in early childhood education from Teachers College. And finally, a very special guest, Dr. Haas Dyson, who is the Faculty Excellence Professor at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. And many of us know Dr. Dyson's work for the insights she has provided over many years in understanding child writing in terms of children's worlds and childhood. And her distinctive work is very interwoven with Celia's work. And so I think we have an amazing panel. And I'm going to turn it over to Sharon.
Thank you, Marjorie. Well, what a treat to be asked to speak about and to the scholarship of the great Celia Genishi, my mentor, my teacher, my friend, my colleague. Borrowing from the wonderful work of the Indigenous scholar Linda Smith, the title of my very brief commentary is to know it's not enough. Using several of Celia's works and stories of our interactions together, I want to illustrate the important contributions of Celia's scholarship for enhancing and reconceptualising educational practices for young children. Now, I'd like to say that I used some thoughtful intellectual criteria, purposeful sampling for selecting the pieces I'm using to frame some of my comments. But all I can say is that I've chosen examples of Celia's work that also represent our journey together from when I was a kindergarten teacher and special educator in Australia to becoming a doctoral student at Teachers College in 1993 and being mentored by two amazing women, Celia Genishi and Leslie Williams, and finally to becoming a scholar in my own right who is still lucky enough to be guided many times throughout many years by the great Celia. So I'm going to interweave the personal and the professional. The pieces I draw upon today are Celia's books on assessment, teaching and young children, Ways of Studying Children co-authored with Millie Almy and Ways of Assessing Children and Curriculum, a sole-edited book but co-written with teachers and others, the Handbook of Research on Teaching chapter that now I can call a delight but at the time was rather a challenge, Teaching in Early Childhood Education, Understanding Practices Through Research and Theory, that Celia, our dear friend Mindy Blaze and Mariano co-authored, and finally, the chapter Becoming Early Childhood Teachers, which is in a book I co-edited with Sue Grieshaber. It's called Becoming Early Childhood Teachers, Linking Action Research and Postmodern Theory in a Language and Literacy class that Celia, Xinying and Tammy co-authored a while ago. So over the past 3 decades or so, Celia's scholarship has been, in her words, resisting narrowness, challenging all of us to think about the education of young children in very complex and grounded ways. And this resisting for me is evident in 2 very compelling ways. The first of these is in the way she always foregrounds teaching practices, and the second is in the theme I call multiplicity, not simplicity. So let me start with a quote from one of those books. And it goes like this: "Much more is involved than may be apparent to the casual observer who notes how the teacher settles a playtime dispute or helps a child to think through the sound and meaning of a new word." And that's from Almy and Genishi in 1979. Teaching young children is often not considered a complex undertaking because issues concerning early care and education are intricately associated with women's work more than any other area of education. And after all, what can young kids really need from a teacher when they're, 3, 4, 5? Just recently, for example, I was discussing with Drew Shitoma, one of the co-editors of the new Handbook of Research on Teaching and the DeMazo Chair of Teacher Education at Rutgers University, that there should be a chapter on early child education in a new volume. Now, you notice I say discussing. We weren't really discussing, we were arguing. His response, while very thoughtful, came down to an assumption that the field of educating children birth to age 8 does not have a strong empirical or theoretical base, and therefore did not warrant a separate chapter. Now, this is not, I'd like to say this is a rare view, but it's not an unusually espoused view about the early care and education field. But what makes Celia's scholarship so wonderful is that for the past several decades, she has been a major contributor to research on teaching, that field that we don't have. What Celia's work does time and again is illuminate and illustrate the intricacies and complexities of practice and the challenges of teaching young children in a range of settings, from Head Start to childcare to kindergarten to first grade. For Celia, classroom life is lived with character, individual and collective motives, scenes and plots that are often unpredictable. And through her in-depth analyses of classroom life and eloquent descriptions of teachers and children involved in everyday practices, Celia's work magnifies the unique, the local and the contextual. Her books on assessment do this wonderfully. In Ways of Studying Children, Celia and Millie Almy, who I unfortunately never had the pleasure of meeting, provide detailed examples of assessment practices tested by teachers. This is one of the earliest books of teacher research in our field. These practices I continue to use with my own student teachers, helping them to see that there are many ways to understand children and that they, like teachers in these books, need to develop their own systems of observation and documentation. In ways of assessing children and curriculum, Celia brings together stories of groups of teachers and in some cases academic researchers whose work together offers new insights on how alternative practices can illuminate different pathways for solving regular and often problematic issues in the classroom. So for me, what I love about Celia's work is she gets down in the dirt. You know, she's like in the lyrics of Lucinda Williams. She listens to the different shades of every note and the endless taste of every word. In her words, you wrote, but often in the words that the children and the teachers say. The foregrounding practices for Celia is not just researching the practices of teachers, but also engaging in a continuous examination and explanation of her own teaching. And Celia does this particularly as a mentor. She helps her doctoral students learn how to traverse the worlds of being both a dedicated teacher-educator and a committed researcher and a member of a university community by involving them constantly in the work of the academy. It's very rare to find true collaborators in the academic world. We've got this star system going, this diva thing. I don't know why, it's a waste of time, we've got too much work to do. But Celia really shows you how to navigate those political complexities. Our work on the handbook chapter in particular really taught me how to do conference presentations. It was with Celia that I learned the first time how to review a research manuscript, how to reject someone artfully and eloquently, but still reject them. I also learned that she sometimes, quite often gets nervous, like me, before a presentation, which made me feel a little easier. I also love the way that sometimes she's finishing one of her presentations that morning before she has to give it. But I guess what strikes me all about interactions over the past years is Celia's responsiveness to the needs of her students and the complexities of their lives. I recall running over to her and Ed's apartment, because I used to live in Bancroft on 121st Street, and I remember being very, very stressed because I was supposed to take up this job as assistant professor at Rutgers in September, and it was now July 24th, 25th, something minor like that. And I remember rushing over to her on a Friday night in the summer of 1998, dropping off what I thought was a pretty good version of chapter 4 of my dissertation, a mere 100, 120, 130 pages or so. And I remember being able to pick up that same chapter, something minor like that. And I remember rushing over to her on a Friday night in the summer of 1998, dropping off what I thought was a pretty good version of chapter 4 of my dissertation, a mere 100, 120, 130 pages or so. And I remember being able to pick up that same chapter with comments 2 sleeps later, early in the morning on a Sunday morning, right? More recently, I remember sitting in a hotel lobby in London with Celia and Ed at the Early Childhood Reconceptualising Conference a couple of years ago, where Celia asked me again about my large Spencer grant. And I said, well, I hadn't heard, you know. And she said, well, you will soon. Because she was one of the reviewers. So she's always present, always there, always so responsive to her students. In a final chapter of Ways of Assessing Children and Curriculum, Celia states, people, and this is a beautiful quote, I love her writing, people do not see themselves as actors, people who accomplish things unless someone demonstrates that they are actors, unless someone places them in a story. Through her documenting of the narratives of teachers and mentoring in and through practice, Celia has empowered so many of us to become doers, to question from the inside out and not from the outside in. In terms of the second theme, multiplicity, not simplicity, I sort of want to talk about how her work again resists this narrowness, you know. Much of the policies and practices that take place in early childhood classrooms, homes, centres and schools come from those who have never taught children. This trend began very early when, in our efforts to become a legitimate profession with our own knowledge base, early childhood educators turned away from their own knowledge base, from their own research, and began to work with great developmental theorists and psychologists, some of them, many of them actually, who graced these halls, like, you know, that Thorndike and John Dewey and, you know, a few people like that. Increasingly, developmental psychology has become what Jonathan Sillen calls the primary supply discipline of early education, despite arguments put over the past 3 decades by people like Celia Genishi that developmental theories are descriptive rather than prescriptive. They can describe how individuals grow or learn over time, but this kind of knowledge does not immediately translate to practice. More recently, economics. Economics is what's driving much of early childhood. The work of economists like Steve Barnett, my colleague and co-teacher, James Heckman, and others demonstrate the short and long-term benefits of a quality early education for children, families and society as a whole. In fact, I'm getting really worried because I think they think early childhood can reduce crime. It seems to be like the next saviour. I'm very thrilled that we're getting a lot of funding, but I'm a little worried too about the work to be done. So to be sure, increased investment in early childhood programs is a good thing, and so is having an expansive knowledge base. But what Celia's work forces us to do is to reflect on our commitments and to question time and again, for who is this kind of emphasis for? For who is benefiting and at what cost? To do this questioning, Celia's scholarship reflects a commitment to ensuring that multiple, not singular theories and perspectives are applied to the complexities of teaching young children. In many of her chapters, she reflexively states her positioning. Earlier in her career, she drew on socio-cultural theory and narrative inquiry. She was one of the first people to use quantitative work in the early childhood field. When we did the handbook chapter, she described herself as committed to a hybrid form of constructivism, grounded in intersubjectivities that combine socio-cultural and psychological views of human relationships, while more recently I would characterise her work as postmodern. Unfortunately, there's a lot of theorising in early childhood, but much of it is limited to critique. A use of theory to question taken for granted practices such as developmentally appropriate practice. And since 1992, with the publication of the book that the great Leslie Williams edited, Reconceptualising the Early Childhood Curriculum, there's been a proliferation of more theory. Feminist, post-colonial, queer, neo-this, neo-that, post-that. Very wonderful, very exciting, and while the Reconceptualist movement has helped to illuminate the politics of developmental and neoliberal discourses in early education, rarely do these scholars engage in the kind of reconceptualising and theorising that really tries to address the inequities of early childhood curriculum policies and practices in reality, in the real, in the very now. In fact, my mate Sam Troy and I presented a paper about this in like 1994, and I'm still worried about this. Theory remains just theory. Celia, on the other hand, through her mentoring and scholarship, has consistently used multiple theoretical perspectives to question, rethink and remake practice. For example, in our book on, it's got a really long title, way too long. Just the point, never do that, I made a mistake. Transformational practices is what I call it now, this is a shortened version. We ask people to provide exemplars of how they use postmodern theories in practice. And Celia and her colleagues, including Tammy here, described their own efforts to implement a language and literacy class in which they tried to teach future educators how to take a social justice stance through several writing assignments, including one being a letter and the other a kind of inquiry project. And in this chapter, Celia and her co-authors demonstrate the same inquiry strands, the same commitment to equity and social justice that they were trying to encourage their students to adopt to the teaching of language and literacy. Unfortunately, the students didn't pick up so much on the social justice concepts that they were trying to teach. But regardless, they persisted with it, they were constantly inquiring, and this still remains one of the few exemplars in our field of how to engage in postmodern pedagogy. That's very rare. As Celia and her colleagues in that chapter state, they keep at the forefront this notion of multiplicity, the assumption that readings of early childhood education vary across different contexts and social situations as a result of different cultural understandings, values and expectations. And this multiplicity was never lost on us students, I might add. It doesn't matter how often I thought I had argued and theorised enough around a particular topic, I could still and can always rely on the great Celia Genishi to trouble up my understandings about a problem. I will never forget the time, and this is an assignment that includes your work, Anne, that I had written this paper where I was supposed to create a metaphor around the teacher Louise in the book Social Worlds of Children Learning to Read and Write. And I had spent hours on this paper because I was going to get it right. And Celia had said you can only be 5 pages. And so I likened Louise's pedagogy to that of a magician. I thought it was fantastic. I had taken ages to write this paper, and I had crafted it and crafted it over again, and I showed step by step the way Louise wove magic in and through her literacy curriculum and pedagogy. Well, that's what I thought. What was the comment I got back from my mentor? Well, Sharon, using the metaphor of magician, while novel, presumes that the teacher just conjures up her practice, as if by magic, when Louise is the deliberate and intentional teacher. So you can see every time you give something to Celia, you get little comments like that, and you go, oh, why didn't I think of that? You know, the word beyond is overused in education scholarship, especially critical scholarship. But I think it's a describer of Celia's scholarship. I think it's the perfect word. Celia's pioneering qualitative studies of early childhood curriculum as it's enacted and experienced by teachers and children, and a use of multiple theoretical perspectives to illuminate and make sense of problems of practice, has helped the field move beyond standardised images of teaching and learning, and provided evidence of how Fred Erickson recently at AERA said challenges the scaling up of early childhood policy and practice, which in many ways Celia shows may very well lead to the impoverishment of practice. So in conclusion, in our handbook of research on teaching chapter, Teaching Practices in Early Childhood, we conclude by this little vision. Actually, Celia wrote this little vision. We thankfully were pretty well done. As this vision comes to life, she says, conversations are heard in a room with an indeterminate number of people articulating many ideas. From where we sit, we see a truly inclusive gathering. We recognise teachers, academics, policymakers, researchers, theorists, parents, and we hear support for divergent theories and practices, developmental interactionists, social constructivists, behaviourists, critical and post-structuralists, among others. This is a hopeful vision that, for me, emulates Celia's scholarly stance on the world. Research and teaching are about relationships, about recognising, acknowledging and embracing diversities. It is always we, not me, with Celia Genishi, right? It is always we, not me. Just imagine where the field might be if we were less concerned with individual accomplishments and could truly come together to work across our differences to figure out how to use our collective wisdom to create opportunities for all young children to be in programs of high quality. Programs that may form a system, but a system where teacher agency and creativity is valued and employed, and the multiplicity and diversity of children's and families' perspectives are incorporated into daily classroom life. This is the kind of vision Celia Genishi has been acting every day. A few days ago, we were desperately trying to find a glass of champagne anywhere in San Francisco before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I remember sitting next to her and she said to me, you know, I'm really worried about this standardisation, Sharon. I don't know if I'm real happy about Obama's vision because I think it's going to take away from the uniqueness of what happens in many different centres around our country and around the world. But Celia, I think your legacy is just what President Obama needs. You have mentored us, you have taught us, I'm going to cry in a minute, how to be in the world and how to continue on your work so that the complexities, the intricacies, the diversities and the multiplicities will continue and endure. And from my family to yours, the Lucinda, the Jack and the Greg, we just think you rock.
Before I attended PC and studied with Celia, she was a voice that I had come to know well, in print, that is. I would follow her citations and conference presentations that continually led back to her work, and there were always particular themes that rang true. First, that young children have a lot to say when given the intellectual space to share their beliefs and theories about the world. Two, that early language and literacy research is best taken up from a perspective that assumes that young children and teachers are intelligent. Perhaps these values might seem obvious to those in the room, but when positioned against today's policy and reform context, a different story might be told. Here I offer just a quick read of a recent newspaper quote that caught my eye and addresses early literacy development. Quote, it was reporting on Denver, and it reads, there's a huge discrepancy in vocabulary, sound recognition, and even knowing knowing books, says one principal. It just takes so much time to catch students up. More assessments are required so that we can begin early intervention as early as possible. Now, at first glance, this news might feel compelling. It feels dire and non-negotiable that children should acquire these skills. In a time when public discourse focuses on what children don't know or lack, it's not uncommon to see stories like these regularly appear in your morning newsfeed. Indeed, the consequences are high for young children, and such findings often result in increased assessments in early childhood, targeted and mandated
curriculum, and penalties for teachers and schools that fail to fix these problems. News stories like these ground policies, anger the public, and often position early childhood development as an all or nothing affair. They leave little to no question when it comes to discussions of children's language and literacy development. Time and time again, Celia's research offers evidence that suggests that young children's language and literacy development isn't quite so neat. Indeed, this complicates things for policies and practice, and Celia's work has dared us all to take a closer look at the young child and all that she can do. In her piece, Talking Their Way into Print, English Language Learners in a Pre-Kindergarten Classroom, together with her graduate students, Celia provides a theoretical and methodological lens that assumes children's capabilities and capacities. She presents a classroom populated with young, linguistically and racially diverse children whose vested interests in belonging to a social community facilitate their growing understanding of multilingual oral and written language. Celia and her colleagues, Donna Young-Chan and Susan Stiers, looked at a classroom that was almost entirely populated with Cantonese speakers, and the research team emphasized Donna's pedagogical dexterity within this rich learning space. With clarity and qualitative precision, Celia and her team go on to describe episode after episode in which children engage in rich and complex dialogue and thought. Free of methodological presumption, Celia, Donna, and Susan present moments that highlight children's linguistic dexterity when presented, and their intelligence, humor, and ability. As a teacher, Donna watches children closely and capitalizes on each moment as one to expand and broaden children's contextualized language use. In this example, Celia and the researchers present an everyday conversation as Donna, the teacher, modeled the language and intellectual dispositions needed to discuss a hailstorm that had taken the city and the children by surprise. So Adam, one of the students, says, One night when my mom was taking me to the doctor's office, it was raining so hard. Donna says, yesterday? Adam, yeah. Donna, you know what? When I was driving home yesterday, I felt something, like someone was throwing something hard onto my car. Tommy, what? Adam, mine's too. But it wasn't someone throwing something hard. What did you see? Tiffany says, I see like a rock, like raining down. And Julie says, it's not rain, not water, it's... Donna responds, if it's not water, what is it then? What was it then? The children and Donna go on pondering what this mystery could possibly be. And then Donna chimes in, you know what? When I saw the ice coming down, I thought someone was throwing something in my car, but it wasn't. It was hail. You know that? What we call ice coming down from the sky? Hail. We call that hail. When you say that, the children then respond, hail. In this instance, Celia shows us that this small everyday moment of classroom time can be a unique opportunity to expand and broaden children's language use. Donna, quote, expects her children to talk about their activities, whether those activities are group or individual. She believes that consistent routines and constant confirming help the children acquire vocabulary. The article goes on to describe Donna as a curriculum maker, demonstrating a number of principles of language and literacy development and then conditions that can potentially enhance it. If we return to the quote that I present on today's children, one of the areas that are often said to be quote-unquote lacking is in vocabulary, and indeed English language learners, this population that Celia and her colleagues were particularly interested in, is often cited as such. And yet Celia, Donna, and Susan, while they do not minimize the importance of vocabulary as one of many aspects of communication, they take it up in a way that positions the child at the center of their research questions, rather than a consequence or a byproduct of them. In today's policy context, a sense of urgency in young children are at the crossroads of adoption of curriculum mandates. Celia's research, set against the backdrops of diverse and vibrant New York City classrooms, reminds us all that the ultimate stakeholders, young children, thrive when teachers view them as capable language users and build curriculum that taps into their children's funds of knowledge and allows them to wonder about new information. As I read Celia's work over the years, one thing is immediately apparent that you actually touched upon, Jared, and that's that she's always working in collaboration with her students. Always the teacher, Celia reflexively mentors us with the perfect combination of compassion and rigor. Those of us that have studied with her have long benefited from her expertise in qualitative research methodology. And luckily, along with her colleague Anne, she made this knowledge explicit to us all in her 2005 book, On the Case, Approaches to Language and Literacy Research. And at the time this book came out, I was actually a grad student here at TC, and having been one of the few people who was lucky enough to have taken coursework with both Celia and Anne since I transferred here. And in fact, we decided earlier that if you two were academically married, I am your only child. Because I'm your only child, I was asked by TC Press to read a version of the manuscript prior to publication and to provide a review from the student perspective. As soon as I began the book, I was taken into this book on methodology like no other before. Only a doctoral student can say something like that. And there have been others, all right, let me tell you. So as a doc student, these types of moments are profound. And Anne and Celia essentially went from parents to rock stars in my world. So I called my doctoral student best pal, Lisa Herzog, and I told her that I had my hands on a hot copy of a real page turner. I went on to describe the book at length and what Celia and Anne were doing with such precision and awe. So much so that Lisa asked me if she could get a look at this manuscript. So when I saw Celia that week for her office hours, I told her about my hot copy of On the Case and asked if it was okay that I share it with Lisa. As I go on talking about it, Celia just sits there looking across her desk with that huge grin that many of us know about. And she started with her belly laugh that got louder and louder and asked me then if I could repeat myself because she couldn't get past the part when I described her book to Lisa as, quote, a real page turner. And that I wanted to pass a hot copy off to her. Celia clearly saw humor where a doc student couldn't even begin to. I didn't even realize what I said. And needless to say, this book went on to have a profound impact on the methodology within my dissertation, Lisa's, and countless others. I should add that whenever I think about my office hours in Celia's office, I always think of peanut M&Ms because she used to have a bowl on her desk. And so a couple weeks ago when I went to her office, it wasn't sitting there. And I asked her about it. And what was so powerful about it is that I since believe that part of the reason that those peanut M&Ms were there all those years was because she knew that I loved them. And I used to come in and take handfuls and handfuls of them on my way out. So I was sort of surprised when I didn't see them there anymore and suddenly felt like an only child. So Celia and Anne's book on qualitative case study begins with a brilliant question to their readers. What is the use of transforming concerns about vast numbers of children into very particular tales of individuals, activities, and places? This question undergirds their book, and in it, the authors describe a case study with clarity, wisdom, and humor. In it, Celia and Anne use the children's book by Peter Siss, Medlenka, as a tool to demystify and complicate the various stages of the research process. Medlenka, a New York City native herself, shares the news of a loose tooth with neighbors. Celia and Anne write, quote, "The ways in which people make a loose tooth meaningful are shaped by context, and that context can refer to, for example, a commercialized city block or to an elementary classroom, to an informal conversation or a formal health lesson, and to large economic, cultural, and historic forces that shape and are shaped by local encounters. What a loose tooth means depends upon setting, event, and discursive conditions. It is moments like this, the interplay of a children's text with an explanation of the basic assumptions that ground case study research, that gives Celia her rock star status. Celia and Anne demonstrate the complexity of being an educational researcher, a delicate balance between our researcher self and the silhouette of our teacher self, to which we never let go. When research feels heavily weighted by discussions of research questions, coding, analysis, and findings, Celia and Anne remind the reader of Medlinka, and in so doing, always bring their work back to the complex landscape of childhood. I started today describing this larger-than-life name in the references, later turned page-turning author with rock star-like status. It was during a New York City snowstorm, not this past one, I'll call it Snowstorm 1.0, where I was working with Celia and I was able to see a whole other side of my academic advisor. It was a Friday afternoon and I was invited to Celia's home to finish the final edits on a piece that we were working on together. All afternoon we watched the snow fall and accumulate in the streets, and I, for one, was dreading my trek back home. Celia and Ed invited me to stay, and her sister Elaine came over. I stayed for dinner with Celia and her family and spent the evening laughing and learning and looking at an annual calendar, photos. And I just found myself learning from this brilliant group of individuals. And there I was, seeing Celia in yet another element, at home with the ones she loved so dearly. And I felt so lucky to be in such perfect company. I've since learned that times like this, full of laughter, interesting people, ideas, and food, are commonplace when you're with Celia. However, at this time, as a grad student just trying to find my way, invitations like this were rare and priceless. I love you. Congratulations.
So it was such a pleasure to look back over Celia's work and reflect on the ways in which I and so many others have been influenced by the scholarly tapestry she has created. I think what I love most about Celia's work is its integrity and how she's been able to weave what she believes so strongly into all that she studies and writes in ways that make sense and are so accessible to teachers and scholars alike. Her voice is unique and powerful, her work engaging and inspiring. I want to talk mostly about Celia's ways of seeing children in general, which is at the core of so much of her scholarly work. It's really hard to believe that her first book with Millie Almy, Ways of Studying Children, was published in 1979, nearly 35 years ago, as it continues to speak in such a relevant and powerful way to the issues faced by so many early childhood students and teachers today. I quote, "If education consisted of nothing more than the acquisition of behaviors or facts to be reproduced on demand, and if all children learned in the same ways, the observation we emphasized would be unnecessary. Teachers would present the material to be learned in the same way to all children and would evaluate learning by the simple procedure of checking responses right or wrong. Our conviction that the child is more than the sum of his or her behaviors at any one time permeates our approach to child study." And they also go on to say, "Development never stands still. Even while we study children, they grow and learn. They change, often imperceptibly, from day to day and week to week." Celia gives us a framework for talking back to standardized assessment by providing alternatives, seeing and embracing diversity as the norm. Her scholarship brings children to life with examples from real lives in motion, young children and teachers at work in early childhood education classrooms. She teaches us that it is only by looking and listening very carefully across contexts and over time that we can truly see and understand young children's capacity and promise. Celia's work pushes us to put aside our own assumptions, tune out the rhetoric around us, so we can listen to children with both our minds and our hearts. Through her scholarship, she illuminates the treasures in young children's knowledge, understanding, ways of being, guiding us to do the same. Years later, Celia edited another book on assessment, Ways of Studying Children and Curriculum, Stories of Early Childhood Practice, where she affirms her message. We have just presented our stories in an effort to persuade, to demonstrate that classroom life is indeed complex and that there is no short route to assessing when the object of our assessment is children's development itself. For development is a story. And along with other features of story, it possesses the dimension of time. Teachers and peers can act to promote learning and enhance development in children, but children need time to experience, re-experience, think, and understand. And for those who make judgments about practice and set policy, it takes time to hear or read and especially understand developmental stories. Celia brings a deep understanding to her study of young children's language and literacy, creating space for new ways to see and understand children who are multi-language learners. As she and Anne tell us in their book, Children, Language, and Literacy, Diverse Learners in Diverse Times, there is a very puzzling contrast, really an awesome disconnect, between the breathtaking diversity of school children and the uniformity, homogenization, and regimentation of classroom practices from pre-kindergarten onward. In our current slice of time, we see distressingly few classrooms and curricula that allow children either the time or space to learn about or through language in a way that they choose or that enables them to utilize what they already know. Many children in contemporary centers and schools are pushed to become school learners instead of players, artists, talkers, loners, or friends with a diversity of backgrounds and interests. My own background in child development and special education immersed me in a different world of assessment for many years, where people were always looking for what's missing instead of seeing what's there. Celia's work opens the door to new ways of seeing young children in process and gives us permission to look beyond and deeply, respecting children's initiative and contributions. Celia's ways of seeing young children, reflected in all she has written about assessment and language and literacy, not only provide early childhood teachers a vision for understanding children's behavior in new ways, but also validate teachers' knowledge. Her careful descriptions of children's ways of being and communicating in early childhood classrooms give teachers access to their stories, ways to listen and hear and see in their gestures, voices, actions, and play. What's most important to them? She shows us a way to look past what's not there to find the essence of what is, to capture the nuances of children's actions and words, to follow their stories over time, to give them a voice. As early childhood practitioners struggle to hold on to a space in their classrooms where children's evolving selves can emerge, Celia's work provides a welcome touchstone. She gives them a framework for finding their own teacher stories about the children they've grown to know, teach, and care for through their own daily practice. She gives us the gift of new perspectives, inspiring us to keep watching and wondering. Celia gives these gifts to the field packaged in her uniquely accessible and engaging style. She chooses her words carefully and with great thought and sensitivity, demonstrating for us her belief that our words and actions make a difference not only in our own lives, but also in the lives of the children with whom we work or prepare others to work. Words allow us to tell our own stories and to hear and nurture children's stories, giving voice to their ideas, hopes, and dreams. It is no surprise that stories play such an important role in her work, as Celia is a lover and a teller of stories. She uses stories to engage us in her scholarship and teaching, to invite us in, to bring ideas to life in ways that we easily understand and relate to. Her stories of children and teachers are simple yet profound. They remind us of what's most important in the lives of young children and how teachers make meaning of diverse children's words and actions. As we see ourselves or children we work with in her characters, we discover our own stories of teaching and learning. we become a part of the larger story that gives meaning to our work and our lives. There's more to Celia's professional story than what her scholarship tells. And as a TC, CNT, and ECE program insider, I've had the opportunity to see the often less visible work that Celia has engaged in as a colleague, department chair, program coordinator, team leader, mentor, and teacher. She invites others to join in, to step up, to go one step further, inspiring us with her wisdom, care, and imagination. Just as Celia tells us stories of children's and teachers' lives in progress, her leadership style respects the processes of others. She gives space, embraces difference, appreciates quirkiness, and sees beyond the limits of our own limitations. Ever a good citizen, she shows us in her words and actions how to engage in what is most important to us, how to hold on to what we believe in, sometimes in the face of challenges beyond our control. As I thought about some different ways to try to do justice to Celia's life and work on this special day, I considered writing her a poem. Most of you probably don't know that one of my longtime family roles is to write silly poems for my children on their birthdays. But when I mentioned this to my now adult daughter, that I might try to write a retirement poem for Celia, I was met with a seriously questioning look. I said that I thought Celia might like it. After all, you know, we are early childhood people, and poetry can be playful, creative, and fun. What I ended up writing are a few simple haiku that I will take the risk of sharing with you today. So the first is called On Scholarship. Okay, where's that Kleenex? She looks and listens, shining her light on children. She helps us to see. And then there's one called On Leadership. She cares, she hears us, leading us quietly where we most need to be. And I'm sorry, I'm just a crier. What can I do? And the third is called On Friendship. With grace and humor, playfully sharing her heart, she brings us to life. So I'd like to close with a final quote from Celia and Ann's book, The Need for Story, Cultural Diversity in Classroom and Community. In short, then, why do we need our stories? Stories help us construct ourselves, who used to be one way and are now another. Stories help to make sense of, evaluate, and integrate the tensions inherent in experience, the past with the present, the fictional with the real, the official with the unofficial, the personal with the professional, the canonical with the different or unexpected. Stories help us transform the present and shape the future for our students and ourselves so that it will be richer or better than the past. So I want to leave you with one last haiku, which is called On the Future. Finding new stories to surprise and delight us in ways yet unknown. Thank you.
I'm always a little different. This will be a little different, but no less heartfelt. So I want to start by reading a passage from Small Island by Andrea Levy. The passage is voiced by a Jamaican teacher in training. Hortense is her name, and it's the 1940s. She is remembering her arrival at her teacher training college. I never knew, she says, that electric light could be used so extravagantly. At home, just one bulb came and went with the whim of the weather. One single bulb that attracted every buzzing, flying, irritating insect from the district to flutter, mesmerized in its timid glow. The 2-story college building was illuminated by lamps that could have made a blind man cover his eyes. Cars attracted by the brightness arrived at the gates, bringing pretty dressed girls who also buzzed around in the light, giggling and chattering and hugging up old friends. As for Hortense, she was, quote, tired and hungry, She had ridden a van all the way from her home on what looked to be an upturned bucket. She wasn't feeling too good. Light bulbs, a what do you know moment. Metaphorically, I was a bit like Hortense way back in the mid-70s when I rode the city bus from my elementary school job to the university to attend graduate school. I was, I suppose, an academic in training. But grad school for me was definitely a one light bulb happening. So I want to tell you this story of light bulbs going off, a path opening up. Oh, look at me, I'm going to be an academic kind of story. The story will star Celia as our humble hero. Me, not as victim or as uncomfortable grad student stuck on an upturned bucket. The piece by Celia that I've brought, ever the good student, of the many fine pieces I could have brought, is the very first one I read. It was filed till I pulled it out for about 35 years in a folder for EDC 385G Genishi. Were you born yet, Tammy? The article is based on her dissertation. It's called Code Switching in Chicano 6-Year-Olds. It happened in Oakland, California, a place that was to figure in my own future in about 5 years from then, but I, of course, didn't know that then. Celia's article is woven with themes that have defined Celia's career and that have helped me weave my own. So let me take you back in time now. Get your tie-dye ready. And I'll start the story in earnest. I was a grad student in education at UT Austin. I have to say I loved UT Austin, and I loved Austin. I had come to grad school in part because it was there, and that's how I've lived my life. It's been okay. I was putting someone through undergraduate school. You've heard the song, All My Exes Live in Texas. Anyway, I liked learning, so I thought, well, since I'm paying the bills, I might as well go too. I wanted to study classroom life, and I was drawn to children's drawing and to the talk that fueled their daily dramas. I wasn't sure where to enroll with an interest like that, but I was welcomed into the reading department. Reading. I like to read, but in and of itself, this was not for me the most gripping of topics. Among the pressing issues of the time were readers' eye movement. All together now, let's do it. If you are into eye movements, yay for you, and I apologize. But I could not see the drama, the kids in those movements. Then there were the reading clinic courses. People gave little children who were having trouble reading school books test after test after test. I had to know all those tests, so that the children disappeared in numbers that to me said, oh my goodness, this little one has trouble reading. There were many, 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 many courses, reading as thinking, reading as curriculum, on and on. I'm sure they were great academic endeavors, but I was unmoved, I was ungripped, I was stuck on an upturned bucket. I was plotting my escape, rethinking my life goals, when a young woman joined the faculty straight out of UC Berkeley. I saw Celia Genishi, this new professor, giggling in the hall with a couple of other faculty members. So I liked her right away. A lot of people don't giggle in academia. It means a lot. She was teaching a class called Sociolinguistic Research as Applied to the Classroom. Applied to the classroom? That sounded hopeful. It was about language in use. So I enrolled. Cue the light bulbs. And those light bulbs started going off immediately, and the reasons why can be seen in this piece on Chicano kids and code switching. First, there was that title, Chicano 6-year-olds. In the neighborhoods I taught in bilingual schools in the early 70s in Texas, Chicano was a self-declaration. It was a movement for power of Mexicans born in the States. I had not read anyone in education using that term, especially not in my department. It struck me. Celia had and has a political conscience. She knows what oppression means, and she has empathy, and it imbues her work in a non-self-congratulatory way. And I think that's so important. Children get exploited, especially little children of color. But Celia doesn't do that. Now, in addition to that title, there was the careful observation, which everyone has mentioned, the attention to children. She was not giving this test and that one, and I was so tired of those tests. She was not drenching children in theoretical jargon. She was not reducing them to little bitty numbers. Children were not reduced to peeking out here and there between her textual lines. We as readers were learning something about the intelligence and linguistic flexibility of little children in action. Third, we heard those kids in action. For example, playing with and arguing about toy astronauts in a sink. The kids traced the shifting rights to play given who found what astronaut, who gave it to whom, and in the process, a focal child shifted from English to Spanish, the dominant language of his addressee, in order to better get that toy astronaut back. Keep hitting that. Now, this sort of thing, kids working out their rights and obligations to each other, the ways they stretched their language in the process, this was the drama of kids' daily lives that I was interested in, and I was pretty sure this had something to do with real written language growth. So I started to move off that upturned bucket and to get into kind of a comfy chair, a really comfy chair with this Celia Genishi, the one giggling in the hall with her friends. Fourth, there was the ethos of the piece and Celia's explicit stance as researcher. It was counter to negative views of children who could be dismissed, as she noted, as deficient. This was right after Bereiter and Engelman's Teaching the Disadvantaged Child. I'm embarrassed to say it was done at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. But you know, we have that now back now, don't we, with our at-risk kids. But Celia was saying, when observed naturalistically, the children were advantaged in the linguistic resources they had to engage with the affairs of their everyday lives. Finally, as a teacher, I could relax reading Celia's work. There was nothing about it that was insulting to the profession. You don't know how many teachers want to run when a researcher comes to the door. The teachers in Celia's work are committed to children and to community. In Chicano, the code switching of Chicano 6-year-olds, the teachers were knowledgeable of the children's native language. They aimed to teach the whole child, as educators said then, and I wish they said more now. I had had no exposure to work that probed children's lives except with Doug Foley and Anthropology of Education, which I had liked very much, but which seemed once removed from the classroom dramas which were at the heart of my interest. Celia's course said that macro issues like race, ethnicity, culture, language played out in the micro details of everyday life, and so they do. Since those years, before you were born, Celia has become my dear friend and my collaborator, really the only person I have ever enjoyed writing with, and the only person who acts like she enjoys writing with me. But she has remained my model. My doctoral students feel they know Celia. In fact, I bet you felt you know Celia when you went across the country. They talk of her with affection. They can barely resist and often do not resist greeting her with a hug. It's true, isn't it? They know they are in her academic line of scholars who advocate for and believe in the young. And so even with Celia retiring, even deciding to step away from daily involvement in her beloved Teachers College, even if she decides to go off to a small island and fish, which is not real likely, we would have to say, she will continue to influence the lives of teachers, kids, and researchers for years to come. And no way she's getting rid of me. That's it.
Wow, wow. What a fantastic panel, and what an honor to hear all of your voices woven together and to really, really celebrate the legacy of Celia's work and Celia as a person. That's what I love, the personal and the scholarly all woven together. So I thank you again, and let's give them a wonderful round of applause. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce President of Teachers College, Susan Furman, who will begin the honoring.
Thank you, Marjorie, and welcome everybody. I'm hardly beginning the honoring. What a way to honor an incredible scholar and a mentor, and to hear from all of you who she's taught, just as she continues to teach all of us here at Teachers College, and will always, Celia, we know that. 75 years ago this year, Teachers College established the country's first academic department focused on the study of teaching and schooling. Around the same time, John Dewey said, "We're all instructors to realize that the quality of mental process, not the production of correct answers, is the measure of educative growth. Something hardly less than a revolution in teaching would be worked." We're all instructors to realize. For the entirety of her career, Celia Genishi has been committed to carrying on that great legacy. She's been a fearless and tireless proponent of the importance of meaningful learning and of recognizing the full potential that each child brings to the classroom. Celia is truly a groundbreaking figure, both in the depth of what she's accomplished in the field and in the breadth of ideas that she's become known for over the course of her career. Her early work on code switching and on young children's multilingual development that Anne talked about laid the foundation for much of the work that has been done to understand children's language learning, something so critical as our schools are increasingly homes for students with varying language backgrounds. Her work in this area continues. She's a principal part of a new grant here at TC, the Query Grant, which promises to reshape the preparation of early childhood teachers to ensure their capacity to work deftly with the multifaceted student population that most teachers are likely to encounter. She's, of course, had an extraordinary impact on education research, as you also heard from Anne and others. The use of case studies in qualitative research, the application of rigorous methodology to a field, as we heard, where, it's young children, they have to be rigorously studied in a way that respects their development and their differences and their accomplishments and all their wonderful attributes. Celia has received countless awards. I'm sure someone will list them at some point. And she's responsible for a highly respected TC Press series. I see TC Press, well represented, back here today. She embodies everything that we hope for TC faculty, writing frequently with her students, preparing students who have gone on to be leaders, locally, regionally, and around the world. While contributing all this excellent scholarship to the field, Celia has also been a truly exemplary community member and leader here at Teachers College. She served as chair of curriculum and teaching twice. So is that a record? Or is that, Marjorie, you've been twice. Have you? And Jim has been twice. So actually, I think Celia set the pattern of being chair of the department twice, as she set so many other patterns in her career. And both times were during pivotal periods in the department's history. During the reorganization in the mid-90s, she was calm, but also firm and wise. I was not here, but I can imagine it. I imagine it called for that, and that you gave it fully. She advocated for that substance and scholarship should drive the reorganization. And she's created a department that's truly cohesive, and something that's not, unfortunately, true of all our departments. Don't quote me. Later, she again ably led the department during my first few years here at TC, and of course, I'm also grateful to her for being part of the search committee that brought me back home to Teachers College. And Celia is widely appreciated for her insight and leadership by colleagues on the faculty in the department and all over TC. As you all know, I'm sure we're spending much of this year, our 125th anniversary, talking about TC's legacy, our history of firsts, which I'm supposed to know by heart but forget one every time I talk about arts education, urban education, gifted education, special education, nutrition education, nursing education, conflict resolution, international comparative education. You can figure out what I forgot. But Celia leaves us with a legacy all of her own, one that I know so many of you here today feel called to carry on and will carry on, and one that I hope she'll continue to be a part of even as she moves on. I can imagine 125 years from now, people at Teachers College will be talking about the greats of the early 21st century, and petite, wonderful, lovely Celia Genishi will be one of the towering figures they'll refer to. Thank you.
We have a special guest who couldn't be here, but she sends her true self.
How much we love you, how much we appreciate you, and how much you mean to us. When I think about TC and the department without you, I honestly can't bear it. They simply won't be the same. You are going to leave a massive, huge hole. So I'm not going to think about that right now. I'm simply going to raise my glass in celebration of you, generous colleague, caring and patient teacher, kind and loving and great friend, and an all-around amazing human being. Have a wonderful party. I wish I could be there. Please, everyone, give Celia a big kiss and hug for me.
I just talked to her on the phone, and she was at the San Francisco airport and hopping on the plane back to Singapore, and she really wished that she could be here, but she recorded this in February, and so she still had the smile on her face, though, from being here. So I just want to add a few personal words, and then I have some gifts to give, and then we'll hear some remarks from Celia. So in April 1993, I interviewed for a position here at Teachers College, and I actually didn't know anybody in the department. That I was a literacy education person. I was part of that reading world, and I knew all the players there, but in the Department of Curriculum and Teaching, I didn't really know people, but one name stood out, and I had an article in a file folder like Anne. It wasn't the same one, but it was from a Ohio State TIP Theory into Practice article about observing children, and I knew Celia Genishi's name, and I thought, if Celia Genishi can be in this department, maybe I could be in this department. And what surprised me is when I came here, I knew Celia as a literacy educator. And when I got to know her, she was very clear that she was really an early childhood educator. And that was really news to me. And it just shows, I think, the breadth of her work and her impact, that I would know her in such a singular way when she is of much more multiplicities in her work. And ever since I interviewed with her, I remember she was in the little small office that Alicia Arthur is now in. I went in, and she was kind of busy and listening, and I was trying to talk intelligently on my interview, and I said something like, oh, there's, nothing more practical than theory, like attributing that to Piaget in a hopeful kind of way. And she was like, what was that? Oh, I caught that, and she sort of, was listening to me kind of babble on, and that was the beginning of a wonderful, generous spirit of being a colleague, a mentor, and a good friend. And I want to really highlight the generosity of Celia. We've heard from everyone the generosity in her scholarship and the respect she shows for children, for teachers, and for peers, the generosity to students. But I think I've felt it, every day, the generosity of spirit, always looking at what is positive, really welcoming. I remember a quote, I can work with anyone, she said one time. I didn't feel that way myself, but I felt like, wow, this is amazing. She can work with anyone. I want to be like that. And I just think that kind of spirit, that I love the mini moments, big ideas, mini moments, and I thought, you're just like a mini person with like a huge impact and a huge spirit. And it's that generosity, and the kind of generosity that not only we feel around the table in meetings of listening, the quiet, the space for other voices, but it's the generosity that I think will live on, not only I think in the legacy that's been described, but in the Genishi Family Scholarship, which is a very generous way to remember your parents and the value and the importance of education in your family. And it's wonderful to have your sister Elaine here, and nephew and niece, and to share that legacy. And that scholarship goes to pre-service early childhood education students. And I think that is the future, and that is the legacy that Celia wants to leave with us. And we gratefully accept that. We thank you for that generosity, and now we have some gifts for you. So would you please come up in front of the table? This is going to be to your back, so I don't know if you want to move that.
First of all, Celia, we have this bouquet. We know purple is your favorite color. We have purple flowers for you today, and we hope you enjoy these and take these home. And secondly, we have a very special gift. Last time I couldn't get it on tag. So, with love, with respect, with affection, for a wonderful retirement, that we don't get manage, but I think you're only 20 blocks away, so we'll still find this part will come back. Step back here. Well, it is kind of right in there. This wasn't a good idea. Yes, this is. It's a very good idea.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I really don't have words to thank you for all your comments. I feel like nobody would deserve such kind and thoughtful and substantive words from all of you. So thank you very much. One thing I want to add, one little correction. Susan was not my student, she's my colleague. And we're not quite the same age. I'm a bit older, but you weren't my student, you're my good colleague and friend. But for everybody, including Susan, I want to say something about their sense of fun and their sense of humor, which came out in their presentations, but it comes out to just in memories of things that we've done together, so thank you for that. I think that teaching is in part about telling, but it's also a lot about relationships and releasing the creativity and good stuff within and among students. How lucky am I that I have had so many students, and I have still so many students with so much, so much good stuff. That wasn't so much about so many, but it's so much good stuff that I'm emphasizing. It's been a pleasure to release the interests and strengths within all of you. So thank you, Susan Furman, Madam President, and to Marjorie Siegel, our chair, my friend Margie, for being the creative director of this symposium, along with the department staff who are always behind the fun with elegance factor at departmental events. I'm not sure they're here. They might be getting ready for the party part. Thanks to Alicia Arthur, Felicia Smart-Williams, Michelle Hill, Yesenia Rodriguez, Patricia Tapia, and Amy Serum. And thank all of you for joining us this afternoon as I inch closer to retirement. I would like to comment on three things. So we're going from the sort of nicely intellectual and personal to pretty personal. First, how I got here. Second, what I plan to do. And third, what I think I'll miss. So how I got here obviously involved my parents. I didn't mean that to be quite so funny. Hiroshi Richard Genishi and Mary Nakamura Genishi, who gave birth to my sister and me in internment camps for Japanese Americans. They made it clear without using many words that family is important and work is important. That includes working hard as a student and as a worker. They're now in parent heaven, but if they were here, I think they would feel proud, although maybe not quite as proud as the day when I was inducted into my high school Hall of Fame in Toms River, New Jersey. So we migrated east after the Second World War. They were thrilled that people I grew up with and people that they knew, like neighbors down the street and my dad's co-workers, would learn about the honor and share their joy. I'm fortunate to have other family members with me here today. My husband, Ed Farrell, Professor Emeritus at City College of New York. My big sister, Elaine Genishi Garrett. My brother-in-law, Roland Garrett. My younger nephew, George Shinobu Garrett. We share a middle name. My middle name is also Shinobu. And his wife, my niece-in-law, Shilby Yi Garrett. My stepsons, Sean and Shane, my older nephew, Chuck Garrett, and his wife, Salima Barich, are here in spirit. I've been more fortunate than most to have a large extended family of loving aunts, uncles, and cousins on my mom's side, now mostly in the Northeast and in California, and on my dad's, mostly in Hawaii and California. Plus, recently, an adoptive Brazilian-American branch of the extended family, including Lucas and Thomas Soto Manning of New York City, aged 10 and 5, and I see them in the back. My academic family is also extended. I want to acknowledge my mentor in early childhood education, Millie Almy, who was a Teachers College alumna and spent many years teaching here. But luckily for me, she moved to the University of California, Berkeley, It happened to be the year that I started my doctoral work there. It's just a great coincidence. Berkeley is also where I learned about sociolinguistics from John Gumpers, who sadly just passed away, and who's the grandfather of code switching research, and Susan Irvintripp, a psycholinguist and sociolinguist, who opened my eyes to the many ways in which language reveals social relationships. And she's still alive and well. There are many, many others who have provided mentorship and intellectual companionship and friendship, like Anne, Sharon, Tammy, and Susan, the totally impressive and overly generous speakers that you just heard from. There's another friend and fellow early childhood educator that I want to acknowledge. The late Leslie Williams, whose gifts as a teacher and whose life-loving generosity of spirit are unmatched. She played a major role in getting me to TC, and perhaps my colleague Lynn Kagan in early childhood policy, who was Leslie's student, feels the same way. It was Leslie who first told me that there was an opening in the department. I applied, and I got the job. I know you can hear us, Leslie, so thank you. On to what I plan to do. The question I've heard most often since I decided to retire is some variation on the question, what will you do after you retire? And sometimes that sensible question was preceded by a comment. For example, I thought you would never retire. And once really said just like that. There are multiple interpretations of this statement. It could mean that someone knew that I earned my doctorate in the mid-1970s, and maybe it was time to move on. It could mean that someone would really like to have my large office. Space is always a premium, at a premium, as you know. Or it could mean that I seem like the kind of person who's happy doing what I'm doing, and so why would I retire? In fact, I've been busily productive for 38 years at 3 large institutions, the University of Texas at Austin, the Ohio State University, and since 1990 at Teachers College. Now back to the interpretations of I thought you would never retire. I like the last interpretation the best, since the academic life is really a desirable one. After tenure, an academic is usually as busy as she or he wants to be. So what will the next chapter be like? How will I keep myself busy after August 31st of this year? I'm retiring from full-time teaching, but not totally from the profession. For a few years, I'll be part of an early childhood grant with Mariana Soto Manning and Susan Recchia, and I'll continue to work with a number of doctoral students. You might even see me at AERA, depending on where it is. Long term, I plan to write, continue to co-edit the Language and Literacy series at TC Press, consult and volunteer with children, all at my own pace. And I hope not to say I'm as busy working after retirement as I was before. I aim to play more. I'd like to read more novels. I recently bought a Nook and have downloaded for 99 cents War and Peace, which I confess I've never read and which I know will take me a really long time to finish. And I also, are you listening? I also plan to learn how to use an iPhone. Really. And you heard it here first, I am giving up my 12-year-old Nokia. And I plan to see more of my family and friends, see more movies, take more walks, go to more museums, do more shopping with my husband, Ed. And he and I will be traveling more, for example, in June to Southern California to visit our 8-week-old grandson, Finn William Farrell, and his parents, of course, Lisa and Shane. Now to the third part, what will I miss? I appreciated this question from a friend who strikes me as the kind of person who might never retire. I don't remember what I said first, but these are things that I will miss once I've wrapped up grant work and ongoing work with students. I'll miss getting to know and working with students who are learning how to teach or work in some way with young children, families, and other professionals, and students who are learning how to do research and or become professors. Students have been at the heart of my career. I think I'll miss the structure that classes give to my days and my weeks. I know I won't miss most meetings. I know I'll miss a staff and administration that have, over the years, given me a platform on which to express myself and my commitments to equitable practices, to say what I think about children, language, literacy, play, and early childhood education. And finally, I know I'll miss socializing with friends, especially in gossip sessions in the hallways or over a meal. I've had the truly great fortune of being part of a program in early childhood education. Here's a shout out to Nancy Saul, Kathy Rickey, and Sam Schreier, who will carry on next year with Susan and Mariana. And I've had the great fortune to be part of the Department of Curriculum and Teaching, which, as Susan Furman said earlier, it really is a department. And I didn't create it, it has become a coherent department. It's full of fabulous colleagues and students. So what a pleasure it's been to sit around many tables with all of you. You are the best. So I thank you for years of colleagueship and friendship that I hope will continue outside the walls of TC. And thank you all for celebrating the earlier chapters of my career and for looking forward with me to the chapters yet to come. Thank you very much.
Party